And welcome back to the Adobe Think Tank, coming to you live from the New York Times New Work Summit. Today with me, I have Wendy De La Rosa. She is co-founder at Common Sense Labs. Welcome, Wendy. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so tell me a little bit more about Common Sense Lab. And I know that your particular area of interest is behavioral economics. So tell me a little bit more about that and what you do there.
Sure. I'd love to. So in a nutshell, Common Sense Lab is a research organization that tries to improve the lives of low and moderate income individuals by creating and, more importantly, testing new products using behavioral science and psychology. So that for us, our press releases aren't, hey, look at this new thing I put out into the world. Because we're researchers, our press releases are, hey, look at this new thing we put out into the world and look at the impact that it's had.
Right.
So we typically partner with fintech companies, credit unions, small and large local government, and nonprofits to do so.
So let's talk a little bit more about that. I know if we think from a financial perspective and your research, tell me a little bit more about what your research is telling us about this next generation of the workforce, or Gen Z, and what does that impact look like as we're moving into the future?
Yeah. That's such a great question, and I feel like I'm about to be a Debbie Downer here because
give it to us the hard facts.
Right.
Like, what do we need to know to get prepared for this?
Right. Well, here's the reality. Companies are getting smarter, faster, more efficient at getting us to spend our money unnecessarily, right? The donut isn't necessarily getting less tasty, it's getting more tasty. Companies are making it easier and easier for us to spend our money, whether it's one click or, hey, you don't even need any payment methods at all. You'll walk into a store and automatically you purchase your items.
Yeah.
And what that does psychologically is to decrease what we call the pain of paying. Right? Every single time that we part with our money, we feel that little bit of pain. So imagine back in the day when Ubers and Lyft didn't exist and you had to take a New York City taxi cab.
And you had to find cash.
You saw this meter rolling.
Yes.
And so you were very aware that every extra mile cost you something. We don't have that anymore, right? All of that goes into the background. And so that psychological distance between our money and what we're spending increases, leading us to spend more unnecessarily.
Right.
I think from the other side, from the workforce side, what you're seeing is this large increase in what I call non-traditional workplaces and non-traditional workforces, where you have many more independent contractors, you have many more part-time workers. And what that means is that these workers don't have access to traditional retirement plans, to traditional health care. But even the way that your income comes in is really hard to manage, because now all of a sudden you have to have the wherewithal to save part of your income for taxes and decrease temptation to spend your money now. But we don't make it easy for people to do that. There's no automatic way in which I, as an independent contractor, get my money, and then automatically 30% of it is set aside for my pending tax bill come April 15. No, instead we put all of this burden on an individual person. Not only do you have to curb temptation on your daily commute, in New York City, the average person sees about 5,000 ads. I now also have to manage my finances in a much more better way, even though they're becoming much more complex. And so the story right now is not a great one to share, and that's what we're trying to at least help with Common Sense.
That's great. So you're trying to bring to light all of these different challenges that this new workforce is coming across. They could be managing an even bigger challenge from a financial point of view. They're also trying to manage all of this input of information. So what do you tell that C-suite to, what do they need to prepare for? What do you tell them to prepare for as they try to entice this workforce and also make it easier for them?
Well, I think that both our political leaders, but also our economic leaders, have a responsibility to our workforce.
Yeah.
And a lot of that means, how are you hiring your work base? For some people, they may really enjoy and love being a freelancer because of that additional flexibility in workplace. But for most people, it just increases stress because my paychecks are lumpy. I'm not sure if I'm gonna stay on for after 6 months that this project is over. And it really does shift all of the burden away from our companies and our industries into an individual person. And it creates this asymmetry in power. And so for the C-suites and the leaders of tomorrow, you have to think that your job is not just to create jobs. you have to create good jobs.
Yeah.
You have to create jobs in which people are earning a living wage. And most of the new jobs created right now, when you look at what's happening in our warehouse industry, that's just booming across the US.
Right.
Those jobs aren't good jobs, right? People can't support a family of 4 on those types of jobs.
So it's really about how can they change the roles themselves to reduce the requirement on independent contractors and really look for the opportunity for more long-term employment at that living wage and really entice this new workforce.
Right. And whether that responsibility is training, whether that
Yes.
responsibility is, okay, I'm going to hire you as an independent contractor, but I'm also going to take on some of the responsibility to help with your benefit pool. You know, there are different states and organizations that are lobbying for this because we
Right.
just need more regulation around what does it mean to be an employee and what does it mean to be an independent contractor. And our Generation Z is going to be at the forefront of that.
Yeah, they're really breaking new ground about how are they redefining what it means to be an employee, long-term versus short-term.
Right.
So let's now go back to Gen Z and let's go back to their consumer behavior. What do we know about their consumer behavior that we think might give us an insight to how they're making decisions in the future? Like, how are they making workplace decisions in the future based off of what we're seeing today? Like, we're getting that influx of advertising.
Right.
What does that tell us?
So there's 2 really large schools of thought here.
Yeah.
Right? The human brain is the human brain, regardless of when you were born. And so we know that we have these inherent biases that shape and shift our behavior, whether that's the fact that we feel losses greater than gains. We see that across any age spectrum, whether or not, you know, complex decisions increase our ability to just ignore and not make any decisions. We see that throughout the spectrum. And so I expect that these biases are going to be the same regardless of what generation you're a part of, because we've seen that over and over again. What I think is different now is that we're seeing younger generations be more connected to their sense of meaning and their sense of purpose.
Right.
And so Jennifer Acker at Stanford has done amazing work really showing that the more connected you are to your sense of purpose, the more grounded you are in your meaning, all these things unlock for you, whether it's your longevity, whether it's your general happiness, your life satisfaction, but also your work productivity.
Right.
And so being able to call to a person's purpose and meaning in work is really important. Lastly, I think we have to, as employers, recognize that the people who are walking through our doors are adults, full-grown living adults who are able to make decisions and act in an independent way.
Yes.
And unfortunately, many of our policies don't reflect the fact that we're managing human beings rather than, you know, we're trying to manage children, right? From the fact that, okay, you have to file your expense reports in this really arcane way. We have to really reshape the way in which we think about our workplace and we think about our employee base and really treat them as humans who are trying to find their purpose and their meaning in life.
That's exactly right. And I love hearing that. If we think about the consumer behavior, this blend between me as a consumer and me as a worker is becoming more and more blurred. I, as a human, want to do great things and make an impact to my community. And I want that to also parlay into the workforce as well. So if we think about this new generation and this new C-suite, how can we help them make that job enticing, look for longevity, look for purpose and giving back to their community, but also help give that flexibility that they still want, maybe not as an independent contractor, but as the full-time employee?
Well, I think we talked a lot about this already, right? So it's one, looking at the person as a holistic person. And when you look at the person as a holistic person, then it's really hard not to pay people a living wage.
Exactly.
Right? That's one. 2, then it becomes really hard not to give people healthcare benefits.
Yeah.
And it becomes really impossible to make the case that I'm not going to help you with your retirement, or that the only way that I'm going to pay you are in these lump sum checks that I know is very difficult for people to manage. When you start thinking about a human as a human being, it becomes really clear about what policies you need to set in place in order to create that full circle.
That's great. Wendy, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate the conversation. And thank you guys so much for joining us. Stay tuned to hear more from the Adobe think tank at the New York Times New Work Summit.